69a. It starts with choitech mi'uber, which means you cut from the fetus that's inside, etc. So even if it's left inside, when it's left inside, it's kosher. However, if you cut from the animal and it's left inside, it's not kosher. This apparently, you see what happened here. The Gemara started off explaining an ambiguous term in the Mishnah, which said mutter b'achila. It's permissible to eat, even though it stuck its arm out there, hand out, and it went back in. It's permissible to eat. The Gemara explained that. The Gemara missed the main point. Where do we know that a fetus inside is permissible to eat? It's busy explaining that ambiguous word. Now the Gemara goes back and discusses the very basic concept of the Mishnah. Where do you know you're allowed to eat the fetus inside without shechita? So the heading here, choitech mi'ubar, is not accurate. It's not an accurate heading. It's probably, the heading should have been, once again, just the fact that it's mutter b'achila, that should be the heading here of this discussion. But we already discussed that, mutter b'achila, so it adds in the new heading, but it's really not. It's not discussing if it was cut. And notice the question right now, minalan, from where do we know this is going on? Is a very basic question. From where do we know that an animal inside is permissible? Samach test A. The first one online is choitech mi'uber. It's down towards the bottom. Choitech mi'uber. Thank you. So the ksiv, because it's written in the pasuk, v'chol behema mafreses pars. Any animal that's hoofs are split, etc. In that etc. it says, choose its card, and it concludes, in an animal, you can eat this. But behema, in an animal, this you can eat. So the Gemara learns. We started off saying any animal. ... In an animal, you can eat it. So behema, an animal. In an animal, the Rabbi says blood. That's including the embryo. If that's the case, what did we just do? We just said that the embryo is called an animal.
I'm sorry, where's the double lashon of behema?
Well, the beginning of the pasuk, v'chol behema.
So the two behemoths tell us that.
Then the end of the pasuk goes back and says, in an animal, this is what you can eat. So we take the beginning of the pasuk, then the pasuk behema, behema, you can eat an animal. In an animal, it's referring to without shechita in this case. That's the chiddush, that the mother shechita permits it. So if that's the case, that you just call the embryo an animal, you should be allowed to do tamura. Tamura is when you have one animal, that's a sacrifice, and you take another animal and you exchange the sacrifice for the new animal. So the new animal for the sacrifice. You say that this new animal should be a sacrifice instead of this one.
It has to be new, right? Can't be an old one.
Well, an animal that wasn't a sacrifice.
Not an old one.
Now, there's a rule that you can't make what we're about to say, you can't make an embryo exchanged for a sacrifice. And you can't exchange a regular animal for the embryo of a sacrifice. And the assumed reason here is because these exchanges, this tmura, needs to be an animal, and an embryo is not an animal. So you can't make an exchange from an embryo of one animal for a sacrifice of another. Alama Tanan, why was it taught in a Mishnah? Ein mamirin, you can't make an exchange. Lo yevarim ba'ubrim, not a limb for an embryo. That means that if a limb of a regular mundane animal, you would switch it. You would exchange that limb for a embryo of a female sacrifice. You can't do that. And you can't take an embryo of a mundane animal and exchange it for a limb of a sacrifice. I mean, you can't exchange a limb and an embryo for a complete sacrifice. And you can't exchange a regular animal for the embryo or a limb of a sacrifice. Why not? If it's an animal, as the pasuk says, behema bibehema, it's an animal. So an animal you can exchange.
Just look at
Well,
the behemoth.
when I say you could exchange, it doesn't mean you're allowed to exchange. You're not allowed to do Tumura. You're not allowed to exchange. All the laws of Tumura are all b'diavad. If you did it, what happens? And what happens is that you have to bring them both as both are considered sanctified. So, in certain cases, you bring them both. If it's a shlamim, you bring them both. Otherwise, you have difficulties. Sin
Why
offerings.
is it b'diavad? If you're bringing something better, why is it b'diavad?
Oh, because the pasuk says that when you're going to start exchanging things, that's this assumed interpretation of the pasuk. Le'tayv v'rav v'rabbatayv. Even if you think you're doing it better, you still can't do it. The assumption is that you may really not be doing it better. So yeah, it's better because it has a different ear color, and really it's whatever.
Once
So-
something is hekdesh, you don't have the right to make deals with hekdesh.
Right. And it's exerts a It's a pasuk, but the
Otherwise,
logic
if you
in
think
there
you're
would
doing
be
the Mishra Sadin, you're not doing the
Right.
Mishra
It's
Sadin.
not,
you
you're
do
not
an
just to
extra
make
right.
that trade. It doesn't belong to you
Right.
anymore.
like how the kids trade things. I'll trade you your candy for this candy, and obviously they have an agenda, but they still say, "But mine is bigger," and they're trying to justify it, right? So,
That's great. That's true.
um,
Good analogy.
so the Gemara says, "Elam Makra." Rather, we're going to do it a little different. The pasuk that we used, Behema bebehema, is not going to be the pasuk that we're actually using. What we're doing is we're using the word kol. V'chol behema l'Rabbi says savlad. All animal that have this. What is the chol? That's including the embryo. The Gemara says, "Ihachi." Once you're using the word kol, and you're going to include everything from that. If that's the case, afilu chaytach min atcholim min haklayos. Even if you cut off from the spleen and from the kidneys and you leave it inside, anything that's in the animal, chol behema, anything that's in the animal should be permitted. Why do we just say that if you cut from the embryo and you leave it inside, that's permissible, but if you cut it from the spleen and from the kidneys, it's not permissible? V'chol, anything that's inside. Amakra oisa. V'chol behema. ... It says oisa teichelu. It usually. It is coming to tell me that only shleima v'leichasera. Only if the original animal, the mother animal here, is complete, that's what you can eat. But something that's cut off from it, that's not included in this. Alamayata. If that's the case, that we're learning from v'chol, anything that's inside is permissible. And it'd be granted if it's not if it's cut off from the mother, it's not permissible. Hasheichet as a behema, if someone slaughters an animal matzbad the musyaina and finds inside the image of a pigeon. Inside.
They find an
Instead,
image.
well, the something that looks like.
Animal.
It appears to be. It's not a. It doesn't look like this child. It's a strange birth. Like you said, Mary had a little lamb, right? It's a strange. So tishteri, it should be permissible because he said anything that's in the animal, anything that's in any embryo. Alama Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Why did Rabbi Yochanan say that it's forbidden to eat? We touched on this before, as you'll see. Why does Rabbi Yochanan say that if it's not the child, if it's not appears to be the offspring of this animal, why does Rabbi Yochanan say it's forbidden? The Gemara says b'inan process. It needs to have split hoofs. V'lekan, it doesn't have it. Really? It needs to have split hoofs? Salamiyata. Kolot b'mei paralitzar. An animal that has the hoofs are attached. That's inside. That's in the womb. That should be forbidden. It doesn't have split hoofs. The Gemara answers, the Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, Reb Shimon ben Yochai. The Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel learns like Reb Shimon ben Yochai that they say prasa the behema techelo. You see, it's the word parsa and prasos are very similar. Parsa means the hoof. Prasos means split. So what we're learning is if it's split, that's good. But if it's hoofs, it's also good. So you here what we're saying is that you need to have not specifically split hoofs, but you need to at least have hoofs. And the emphasis here was that if it appears to be, if it looks like a pigeon inside the cow that it's giving birth to, the pigeon doesn't have hoofs. So therefore it's not going to be permissible. Yes, if it has hoofs, even if it's not split, it's permissible, like even according to Reb Shimon, who holds that if it would have been born, it wouldn't have been permissible. But when it's in the uterus, it is permissible, but it still needs to have hoofs. Okay.
Is it talking about such an early stage of gestation that it hasn't begun to differentiate?
I don't think so,
No?
because at the early stage it would be more permissible.
Because you can't distinguish, right? At that point.
Yeah.
Because
would
in
be
terms of
more
the hooves, you
permissible.
probably wouldn't be able to distinguish so early.
This is not normal for a kosher animal to be eating birds.
No,
How do you
cows-
how do you find
cows
a pigeon in a
don't eat
cow? Oh, okay,
birds.
okay.
No, it's not. We're not
He's
talking
giving
about in the
birth to
stomach.
a pig.
Well,
We're not talking about in the uterus. This is a strange genetic,
Disease.
mutation that something happened over here. All the wrong genes are coming out in this child. We're anyways 90% the same as a banana, so right? Okay. Rav Simi Barashi Amar. Rav Simi Barashi says, Liyolam kidakamet mikara. Really, how do you know that you're allowed to eat the embryo, even the fetus, even if though it's alive or dead inside the mother? Because we said in the pasuk, behema bebehema, an animal inside an animal. We had a problem with that, because then we should be allowed to do tumura. So he says, "With the kakashalach," and this that you had a question, ein mamirin, that you can't do tumura. Why shouldn't you be allowed to do tumura? It's a regular animal. Even the pasuk calls it an animal. Hamani Reb Shimoni. We said when we introduced this concept of tumura, we said that this is a mishnah. It is a mishnah. It's an anonymous mishnah. The only thing is, the end of the mishnah has more opinions, and we're discussing who is this first opinion here. And if we can arrange for it to be the opinion of Reb Shimon holds that you can't do tumura on the embryo. You can't exchange the embryo or exchange the embryo for a carbon for a different reason. Not because it's not considered an animal, for a different reason. So if we can organize this, then we can say that really the embryo is called an animal. And how do you know that you can shech the mother and eat the embryo? That's because an animal and an animal. If it's called an animal, why don't you do tumura? Oh, we have another rule that tumura can't be done like that from a different source. And it's Reb Shimon that holds that other source. So if we can say that this anonymous introduction to the Mishnah of that you can't do tumura from an embryo is Reb Shimon, then we've resolved it. Now we have to work on that. So Hamani Reb Shimoni, it's Reb Shimon. The Makish Tumura L'Maiser. Reb Shimon compares Tumura to Maiser. Now, what happens is every animal, every carbon, it says you can't do tumura. You can't do tumura on that. When it comes to meiser, it repeats again that the meiser carbon, you can't do tumura on. Now, meiser was one of all of the karbanas. It didn't need to specify that by meiser also you can't do tumura. So the Gemara says, why does meiser davar shayu b'chlal, something that was included, v'yatzim min haklal, and it leaves the generalization? Why does it leave? This we say in Rabbi Shmuel Eimer, kol davar shayu b'chlal v'yatzim min haklal l'lamed. It leaves to teach. Lo l'lamed al atzma yatz. It's not just teaching about meiser. Elo l'lamed al haklal kuli yatz. It's teaching about all karbanas. Right? It didn't need to talk about meiser, that meiser you can't do tumura on, because it says you can't do tumura on every carbon. Why does it say you can't do lo yavaker ben toiv l'ra b'ra l'toiv, right? By the Meiser. So why does it leave that general rule and to be discussed specifically to teach me something about all Tmura? Ma Meiser, just like Meiser, ein anoyeg be'ivarim v'ubrim, just like Meiser. How do I do Meiser on an animal? Well, the animal walks through this hole in the fence, and the 10th one gets a mark on it that it's Meiser. Now, a limb doesn't walk through on its own, so a limb can't be Meiser, and an embryo doesn't walk through on its own, so an embryo can't be Meiser. So we say like this: just like Meiser is never applicable just to a limb, or to an embryo or fetus. That's what I'm learning. Why does it say a special discussion of Tmura by Meiser to make that comparison Meiser to Tmura that it doesn't apply to an embryo into a fetus? Excellent. Now we have another source, a different source, why Tmura doesn't apply to an embryo is because it's compared to Meiser. And if the introduction to the Mishnah is Reb Shimon, so then I can say that really the reason why an embryo is allowed to be eaten with the shechita of the mother is because behema bebehema. You called it a behema, it should be Tmura. I can't do Tmura on an embryo because it's compared to Meiser. Minat Temra. Gemara asks, how do you know that the beginning of our Mishnah is really Reb Shimon? Maybe everyone holds of that. And if everyone holds of that, then we're going to lose out on the word behema. And I ask, how's it called behema and you still can't do Tmura? So it says Tanan. We're going to prove it. The Mishnah goes on. The Mishnah says over there, Amar Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi has a conversation with someone. It doesn't say to who. It says, V'alayim min mikdashim. When it comes to sacrifices, ha'ayim ragla shel zu oila, kula oila. Someone says that the leg of this animal should be a burnt offering. The entire animal becomes an offering. Af kashem regel shazu, tachazu, take kula tmura, tachta. Also, when I say the leg of this animal should be in exchange for that animal, so the whole thing should become a sacrifice, just like the original sanctification. If I sanctify just the leg of an animal, according to Rabbi Yosi, the whole animal becomes sanctified. So too, when I exchange a leg of an animal, the whole animal should become sanctified. Laman kamahadale. Who's Rabbi Yosi talking to? Eily maler Rab Meir of Rabbi Yehuda. If he's talking to Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which we didn't discuss their opinion. Miyisli haisvara. Do Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda hold of what Rabbi Yosi is talking about? See, Rabbi Yosi is trying to prove something, and his proof is, you agree to me this, so now agree to me the next thing. What's the first thing? That if I sanctify a leg of an animal, I say that it should be an oila. The whole animal becomes an oila. Once you agree to that, now you should agree to me that if I exchange a leg of an animal, that the whole animal should also be Tmura. You agreed to me originally that the whole animal becomes sanctified. Now agree to me to the exchange, the same thing works. Who's he talking to? If he's talking to Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, then they would need to at least agree to the first thing for him to use the comparison, the next thing, to say, now agree to the next thing. But if they don't agree to anything, then it can't be talking to them. Miyislu Haisvara, do they hold of this? V'hatanya, but it was taught in the Braisa. I could have thought that if someone says that the leg of this animal should be a burnt offering, that the whole animal becomes sanctified. Talmud Laimar, the teaching tells us, the pasuk says, Kol ashayitim mimeno la'Hashem yeh kadosh, mimeno kadosh v'lei kula kadosh. Anything that you give to the Hashem from it should be sanctified. From it is sanctified, but it's not entirely sanctified. Yachal teitzi l'chulin. Well, maybe if it's not entirely sanctified, so maybe you did nothing. Talmud Laimar yeh. So it says, it shall be baviyasitei. It is in its position. What does that mean? Kate said, how is this? Timachel etzarchi oilas. You sell it for those that need an oila. And the rest of the money that the original owner gets, that money is mundane money, except for the value of the leg that he already sanctified. Which that money doesn't go into his mundane wallet. That he has to put to other wallet, this holy one. Different Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which means Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda both hold. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda both hold that even the original animal doesn't become sanctified. So how could Rabbi Yossi be talking to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about the Tmura? If you agree to me to the original, so now agree to me to the Tmura, but the original one doesn't become sanctified according to them. So who's Rabbi Yossi talking to? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Aimrim. This is a brisa. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say differently. They say minayin la'omer ragla shel zu oila tekula oila. How do I know that if someone says that the leg of this one should be an oila, and if someone says that the entire sacrifice becomes an oila, Talmud Leimer yiyah, it shall be l'Rabbi Kula. Means the whole thing becomes an oila. So according to Rabbi Yossi and to Rabbi Shimon, the whole animal becomes an oila. Okay. So who was Rabbi Yossi talking to when he's discussing Tumura? Laman. Who's he talking to? Eily Rabbi Meir of Rabbi Yehuda. If he's talking to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, Miyas Lahu Haisvara. Do they hold of his first opinion that the animal becomes entirely sanctified? They don't hold of that at all. Elalav Rabbi Shimon. He must be talking to Rabbi Shimon. And what he wants to tell Rabbi Shimon is that if the original animal becomes sanctified, so then the Tmura should also become sanctified. That's what he's telling Reb Shimon, because Reb Shimon actually holds that the original animal, if you say that the leg of this animal should be a burnt offering, the whole animal becomes a burnt offering. That's what, you see, let me set this up clear. I have a brisa. In the brisa, it's 2 against 2. It's Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda versus Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. And the brisa is very, very basic. It's not talking about an exchanged animal. It's talking about an original sacrifice. If someone sanctifies the leg of a sacrifice, just the leg, according to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, the leg remains holy, but it doesn't spread to the whole animal. According to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, it spreads to the whole animal.
What do they hold by yiyah? They don't hold by yiyah?
They learn yiyah to mean that the whole animal becomes. They do it different. Yiyah l'Rabbi Kula, that the word yiyah teaches me that the whole animal becomes holy.
So they're saying if you sanctify a limb, then the whole animal.
The whole animal becomes.
Okay, fine.
Okay, that's all about original sacrifice. Now I go back to the Mishnah that I quoted before. That was a brisa that we said. Let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts off anonymously. It says that if someone, that you can't exchange an embryo for a sacrifice, or a sacrifice for a sacrifice embryo for another animal. You can't do that. You can't make that exchange. But it doesn't say who's saying that. Well, the Mishnah goes on and it says, Rabbi Yossi says that, don't you agree that if you have an original sacrifice, original animal, and you sanctify part of it, that the whole animal becomes sanctified? The same thing should apply to Tmura. That you could exchange part of an animal for a sacrifice. Rabbi Yossi is arguing on that original, anonymous opening of the Mishnah. So who's he arguing on? Who's the opening of the Mishnah? It can't be that's Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda that say that you can't make an exchange for part of the animal. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi's comment is, don't you agree that an original sacrifice, the whole animal becomes holy? So therefore you should say the same thing by an exchange? They can't be Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda because they don't hold that halacha by an original sacrifice. The only one that agreed to him in that brisa was Reb Shimon. It must be that Reb Shimon agrees to him about an original sacrifice, but disagrees with him about Tmura, an exchange, and now Rabbi Yossi is trying to prove his point to Reb Shimon. So who's the opening of the Mishnah? It's Reb Shimon. What does Reb Shimon say? That why can't you use a part of an animal or an embryo to be an exchange? Because he compares it to Meiser. So now I have, what's the source of shechting an animal that you're allowed to eat the embryo? Because it's called a behema of the behema. Why can't I use it for Tmura? Because it's Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon holds it's compared to Meiser. And Rabbi Yossi was talking to Reb Shimon when he argues with him. Okay, that's the proof. The Gemara says lie. It's not a good proof. Why? Rabbi Yossi Tamer de Nafshei Kamar. How do you know that Rabbi Yossi is telling the person, don't you agree to me to the first part? Now agree to me to the second part? Maybe Rabbi Yossi is not telling. Maybe Rabbi Yossi is not saying, don't you agree to me? Maybe Rabbi Yossi is just saying the reason for his own opinion. I hold that an original sacrifice becomes. He's justifying his own opinion. He's not trying to convince anyone else. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi is actually talking to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and he's telling them that an original sacrifice becomes sanctified if I sanctify just a limb of it. I know you don't hold of this, but I do. And now let me tell you, once I hold of this, so now I hold also that an exchange also does. But he's not convincing Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda that they should agree to him. He's just justifying his own opinion. And therefore, not necessarily is the original opinion in the Mishnah, Reb Shimon. So we lose that. What's the conclusion here is that we're going to have to use the word kol behema to teach me that the embryo is permissible when the mother is shechted. I looked up this pasuk in the Torah Tamima. He quotes the Gemara and he has his little comments on it. So he says he's wondering why there are people that quote the source that you're allowed to eat the embryo, and they say behema, behema, when the Gemara concludes not like that. Okay. The Torah Tamima wrote a commentary on the Gemara, but as a way of marketing it, he put it on the Chumash. But his commentary is really a Gemara commentary. He's discussing Gemaras and all of that. If you want, you can read it on the Chumash also. But it's sort of like the Minchas Chinuch. There's a commentary on the Rambam. You just put it on the Chinuch, but it's always discussing the Rambam. Okay.
So all the Torah Tamima in like Mikras Gedolos is really...
Well, the Torah Tamima is a separate Chumash. What he does is he quotes Gemaras and Baises and different things, and then on the bottom he writes this commentary.
He does that like in the Chayina, like there's Rashi on the bottom or something. He quotes Rashi or a lot or something.
Then there's commentaries. There's super commentaries on Rashi. Rashi has a lot of commentaries, but this is if you're looking up if you want to know like how does this drasha work or something, you look in the Torah Tamima and he'll in his commentary there he'll explain what he thinks is the way the drasha works. The other one that does this is the Malbim. The Malbim works on drashas a lot. The difference is the Malbim is very into grammar, and the Malbim actually has theories of how you could make your own drush, which we don't make our own drush, but he's sort of like put it into rules of how the drushes work. Okay, we have a new Mishnah here. Hamevakeres, an animal that's giving birth for the first time, its first child.
Is it a female or male?
Well,
It's giving birth.
No, he's asking about the child.
Don't look at the child.
Let's assume.
Oh, I thought let's assume Harris is like the firstborn.
No,
female.
Yes, the mother. The mother is a female.
No, I'm saying Harris.
It's too early in the morning.
The mother is a female, and the child is a male, because the male child becomes the hazachar takdish. The male child becomes the sacrifice. Okay.
So a Bechor.
The bechor. So it should be a sacrifice here.
Firstborn.
Hamak shalelid, that's having difficulty in the childbirth. Mechatech ever. It could be it's saying that you're allowed to. It could be it's saying that this was what was done. That he cuts off limb by limb as it's coming out, as it's and umashlich leklavim, and you throw it to the dogs. Well, it could be because of a treif is thrown to the dogs. It could be it's coming to tell me that it's not considered sanctified in any way, and therefore it could be thrown to the dogs, even though this would have been a sacrifice if it would have been whole. Okay. Yatsa Rubai, if the majority came out, now Rashi explains this, and he cut it, he cut it then. He wasn't allowed to, but he cut it. And even though the majority came out, this was a sacrifice. But he cut the sacrifice. Harezi Yikavar, this needs to be buried. And even though the first animal did not become a sacrifice because it got killed, nevertheless, the second animal is not a sacrifice. It's only the firstborn. That's the sacrifice. This one, the firstborn died, it was killed. So the next child that the...
The same rules with אישה שיולדת. אם יוצאים ניתוח קיסרי,
Right,
אז הוא לא בכור.
right,
The same concept.
right. Okay. Itmar.
Wait, is this like a pidyon abain or no?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. That the same thing would apply to a pidyon haben. That if it's not born in the regular way, this is a different case. This is where the child is the offspring is not surviving.
Better if whatever comes first from the mother, it's better. It's the one that is the firstborn. So
Right.
don't make a difference. It's the first one to get out.
But that's
Right.
not rachis, whatever.
Reishis Einai? That's
Yeah.
with the father.
Yeah.
Reishis Einai.
That's the only
Reishis Einai, that's
abain.
interesting. Pidyon haben, Reishis Einai is for nachala, is for inheritance. Pidyon haben is peterechem. The father can do
yeah.
the father can do five
women,
pidyon
all the
habens
women, yeah.
if he marries 5 women at the same time or not
Yeah,
at the
right.
same time. He can still do 5 pidyon haben.
That's what.
But he's only going to have one firstborn that's getting a double portion for inheritance.
It's the first one.
Itzmar. It was
Whatever
stated.
happened to Rabbeinu Gershon?
Yeah.
Hey, you guys never believed in it anyway.
No, we did not.
Itzmar. It was stated by Amoraim. We have a discussion here. Yatsa shlish. If a third of the animal came out, now a third is less than half. It's not the majority. Okay? Umachrei. And he sells it, loivet kechavim, to a non-Jew. This is like mechiras chametz. What he's trying to do is he's trying to avoid his animal going to the Kohen and becoming a sacrifice. So he sees the animal coming out, maybe he sees it's a male or whatever, and he sells it, the third that came out, he sells that came out to the non-Jew. It wasn't born yet, because you need majority, you need more than half to be born. If it's born, it's sanctified, you can't sell it. It's like selling someone the Brooklyn Bridge. It's not his. It's sanctified, it belongs to the Kohen. It's you can't sell that.
Oops.
So v'chazar v'yatza shlish acher, and then the rest of it comes out. Now you have 2/3. Rav Huna Amar Kaddish.
Wait,
Rav Huna says,
I don't understand what happened. He wants
that's
to
not
sell
what-
it.
It says that
He's
he
not-
came back in and another third came out. So the first one's been negated by what we
oh, it's
learned
been
originally.
negated. That's the pshat.